Thank you very much. Sorry to push it all. And a huge warm welcome from me. I'm Laura Keys. I'm CEO. I'm doubling up as a robot right now. Sorry, I'm connected through the Teams call, so actually it's I'm the CEO of a company called Hive Learning. There's lots of familiar faces here and lots of new faces, which is great to see. The reason we're all here in Scale Space, thank you so much for those that jumped on the central line, the worst line on the underground to make the way here, is this is actually, I thought I'd give you a little bit of why we're in this building. So this building is actually called Scale Space, as you know, says it, it's not a building. But it's a really cool co-investment between Glenn and Chalcott, who are investors in entrepreneurs, disruptors, innovators, leveraging the leveraging the best of Gen AI across multiple businesses like mortgages, digital marketing, fintech, edtech, and health tech. And it's a co-investment with, also in this building is a set of scientists who are researching and making discoveries and building businesses around things like how to get pure and clean water to 1 billion people by 2030. So it's this kind of innovative space where you've got science, research, technology, all coming together, thinking about how we can create a better space for our communities, our country, and globally as well. So it's a real hothouse of innovation here, and it's highly collaborative. And so we thought, what a great place to bring together Natal and myself and you great people to think about what the future of L&D might look like and spend some time discussing that together. So welcome to this space and thank you for coming here. And just to give you a little bit of an overview, so Hive Learning is a business, we're super passionate about building a great product which our customers love. We obsess over human-centric and Gen AI design, but essentially we're a platform which is helping organisations to disrupt how you're thinking about L&D within organisations. So thinking about how you can speed up skill acquisition, making it more relevant, more personalised, and in the flow of work. So they're the things that we obsess over, and we've got some cool tech which we're happy to show. We also are running a beta cohort we'll tell you a bit about later on. So that's who Hive are, and it's also why we love Natal. So I met Natal a few years, well, I've met Natal fairly recently, but I've known of Natal and Agile L&D for a long time. It's kind of how I started. Those that were on the webinar that long ago, it's how I started my career at Hive, was bumping into someone who was obsessing over applying Agile L&D into the organisation, lady called Tracy Waters. But we are super passionate about, at the moment, all the change that's happening. I think we were referring to before, I said, what's new at Marks and Spencer's? And you went, what's not new? Which I think is probably the answer that anybody could give right now in terms of everything is changing and change feels like the new norm. Lots of tech transformation happening. Hello, welcome, no worries, please grab a seat. Globally, lots of changes in how we think about organisations, organisational design, work, flexibility, all of these things are happening. But with that comes, how do we go about actually doing it? So on one side, Hive is a business that's thinking about how do we help and develop and change skill acquisition in organisations, but it also makes sense for us to think about how do L&D operate and what are the ways of working which help you as functions, teams, organisations to think about the operating structure and design that from there. So when we read Agile L&D, which we love, and if you haven't read it, please do, it's fantastic, and not just once, 10 times over.
Laura stars in the book as well. I did interview Laura, and she, your words are peppered throughout.
So we, as a product business, we obsess over agile design and a system called product operating model. And actually, when you apply Agile L&D and product design and product operating model, they're really similar, and that kind of combination of the two just makes total sense. So we were really excited to kind of finally meet and discuss and see the book. And so without further ado, I'd love to introduce Natal to you all, to those that do know her and obviously those that don't. So welcome, Natal. Thank you. And I'm going to hand over. What we're going to do is Natal's going to spend some time taking you through some of the principles that are written within the book. So we're going to spend a bit of time just to give you a bit of the lay of the land, talking through the 5 principles. Then we're going to open it up. We're going to make it interactive. So please get your thinking caps. We want to hear what your thoughts are, what your questions are. So we're going to ask you to start thinking about what questions you want to ask. How does this apply to you? And then we'll spend some time doing a bit of Q&A together. We'll have a break. so you're not here without stopping. So if you do need to go to the living between, please do pull out here and to the left. Please help yourself to tea and coffee, but we will have a 15-minute break about 3:45. Carry on for the last half an hour, 45 minutes. Does that all sound okay? Everyone here for the right reason?
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm going to hand over.
Are you in the right room?
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm going to step.
Okay, all right.
And hand over to you for that.
Cool. So I need to do this to the little camera, and then it starts following me. Quite peculiar. Okay, so I was going to show a couple of slides, so I might get them up, and we can then get into it. So give me a couple of moments while I work that up. Do it just like that. So do I share and then present the slides, or do you? Like that? Does that work? Yeah. And then is this work?
I love it. I love it when it all comes together.
So a little shout out for the book. But you can win a prize today. Oh, check it out. Look at that. So we're all brought together today due to the new book, Agile Learning and Development. But I already know in the room we have a mixture of people that are, I would call kind of L&D royalty, as well as HR leaders. So we've got people from across the people profession. But also what's interesting about the L&D space is that many people don't necessarily identify as HR. And that was one reason why I thought this book was quite important as well. And I think I was going to just say a couple of words about writing the book first. Some of you might wonder, well, why are you writing a book that's focused more on L&D and OD, organizational development, after writing Agile HR? And there's a number of reasons. And one is that what I just mentioned earlier, L&D is kind of its own profession in itself. And I actually started my what was now known as a HR career in learning and development, but I sat in a business team and I'd had nothing to do with HR. And actually, after that role, I went and became a training consultant. So I walked the streets of London, running management development programs and programs like influencing, negotiation, and as my partner thinks is hilarious, time management. That's not my forte. I've realised all along it was Agile anyway, so it was a waste of time, literally. And but I walked the streets of London, and that's where I learnt my stripes as a facilitator, because I used to have to stand up in front of a room of usually middle-aged senior leaders that were men in financial organizations. So that was the main client. But I would walk in, I would deliver these programs, I would get my happy sheet signed, and then I would walk out again. And I pretty much never saw these people ever again. And I kept going back to that when I was writing this book, thinking that was not a very good way of changing people's behaviors, and what were we trying to do? What was the goal? What was the value? So it was so interesting to sort of return to my early career while I was writing this book. But that's how I started. And so my first role, I sat in a HR team behind secure doors in a bank in London, and I was in the leadership and development team. And then people started to ask me about payroll and grievances, and at first I went, oh no, I'm cool HR, and then I realized, no, hang on, it's all interconnected. And one of the themes of the book is that you can't actually separate any of this from each other. It is about a whole product that goes out across the organization. So, but that's kind of the start of my career. And from then on, I embraced fully, the whole people function and people strategy. And I went back to university around it and all those kind of things. But that's how I started. So I did kind of start as an L&D'er that identified as just an L&D'er and not necessarily HR. Also, I know so many of you in the room are on the Agile journey in some way, or you've been doing it now for many years. And often it's the learning and development team that start it, or it makes most sense for it to be applied there no matter what. But often the L&D teams start the change and also then lead the wider function, and often are then tasked with leading transformation across the whole organization. And it's very natural that L&D become agile coaches. Like we sort of naturally step into that space, to the horror of some tech agile coaches, I know, but yeah, we can do it as well. So I also thought that there was a real need for people in that area to kind of understand how to apply these skills and then start to lead transformation elsewhere. So that was also why I wanted to focus on that topic. Also that it is this big profession. There's people like Laura leading amazing organizations like Hive Learning, and there needed to be a book for all the independent consultants and suppliers in the L&D market on how to apply agility to their work, and also help clients do that, because you all know there's nothing worse than, you know, an organization buying a learning product and then just releasing it out as the answer to the problem and then going, well, why is this not working? So the need for agile and that kind of business agility approach I just thought was so key. But also, I think a lot of the really big, complex, juicy problems that we face in the workplace require some type of L&D or OD capability. And as you know, if you've read the book or what I talk about next, I espouse T-shaped people in T-shaped teams. So I'm saying you can't do it alone. But I think every business challenge at the moment requires something around learning, and particularly around org development, such as skills-based talent. You know, how do you even broach that? And that, yes, has a big kind of recruitment and kind of internal talent succession kind of workforce planning element, but so much of it is how do you upskill, reskill, or just kind of understand skills in the first place. The other one, of course, is climate emergency. How do we help organizations make that shift? And again, there's so much around learning and changing behavior and also changing operating models. And then also, I think a big one is digitalization and AI. So we are all kind of trying to get our head around what does this mean? And you've got to literally build skills as you build solutions. And I just find that fascinating, but I think you've got to approach it in an agile way. Yeah. And I know that you're doing that as well at the moment. Yeah. So we might get Laura to talk a bit about that. So that's why I thought focusing on Agile L&D was really key. So what I thought I'd do is I really want to hear from all of you, and I see some old friends and familiar faces as well as new ones. It might be really interesting who actually met me years ago through some of my Agile HR meetups. Yeah, it's really, and so I think some people in this room, that's like several years ago at least. Yeah. So for anyone that doesn't know my kind of journey, I, like many of you, probably heard I was an L&D'er, and then I worked in HR for many years. And I always joke it was about the 25-box matrix in an organization that tipped me over the edge. But I had a 25-box matrix, and I was global head of talent at this organization. And I went around trying to reduce the boxes, and I went, hang on, it's not about the boxes. It's about the people and why we're doing this. Anyway, that kind of led me onto this journey that gets me here today. But when I discovered the power of Agile, I started doing these Agile HR meetups that some of you would remember. The first one that my poor suffering partner here in the wombat shirt will tell you about was in this basement flat in London with, you know, just a few people. And quite interestingly, these top tech scrum masters turned up to see what I was doing, because they didn't like the idea that this HR person was talking about Agile HR. So they turned up to see if I knew what I was talking about. And I'm very proud to say that I got the tick and they allowed me to keep going. So, but yeah, and so that just kept growing and growing. And then by the time, I think someone mentioned the Lloyd's one, we had like 100 people or more in the room, and it was so amazing. And so that's kind of how this whole sort of movement developed. And then after COVID came along, and we sort of stopped those activities. And as many of you know, we do a lot more online now. But what was interesting is that COVID really accelerated this topic. So when I first started, I would be in conversations, and it was kind of a bit new and interesting, but a lot of people didn't really know what I was talking about. I think since COVID, everyone just talks about business agility like it's an everyday thing. But I think that the topic itself has matured as well. So it's no longer about, oh, do you apply Scrum, or do you use a Kanban board? It's very much about how do you evolve an organization to be adaptive and responsive to the environment in which it operates. And I think now that we talk more about business agility and not just about applying Agile, it's really shifted the kind of conversation. And so that's kind of the setting behind the book. So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk through fairly briefly to begin with the 5 principles that the book is based on. And then I'm going to ask you what you want to know. And then Laura's going to come up. We're going to start talking about different principles and then start answering those questions. But also, if anyone's got a story to share or some examples, I've heard a few already, I would love to hear those because if anyone's gone and applied some of the work that I've shared over the years, I would love to hear where you're at and what's happening for you. Okay, so the 5 principles are these. The first one is product-led. This is, like what Laura just talked about, how do you understand the product that you're delivering across the organisation? Actually, I might just put this up. And for many of us that work in organisations, and particularly the people function, traditionally, we've seen our employee experience as multiple component parts. So I do learning, someone else does reward, someone else does a talent, someone else does talent acquisition even, recruitment, and off we go. But what we're saying here is that employees don't differentiate any of that, and we have to get comfortable with the employee experience is a whole product that goes across the organisation. And the reason I talk about that is that product is about solving problems and understanding the value that you deliver. So products, we buy products because we want to solve a problem. So even your phone, I know we're addicted, but you bought your phone because you want to stay connected, or you need to talk to your kids, know where they are. You need to connect with your friends on different apps. So, there's a common one in the world of marketing where it says someone doesn't just go to the hardware to buy a drill. They go to the hardware to buy a drill, to take it home, and drill a hole to put a picture up. And that's the problem that they're trying to solve. So when you think about your employee experience, how are you solving problems? And if we think about learning and development in particular, what is the problem behind it? And how do you, because by defining that, you start to understand the value that you're going to deliver. I'm going to talk you through an example actually that I worked on just yesterday. I ran a full day workshop with the team, but I might just introduce a couple more and then I'll take you through that. So the second principle is human-centric design, and we are going to focus a bit more on this today because L&Ders love human-centric design, but it's so core to building a great product. So how do you get into the experience of work? How do you understand the pain points, the moments that matter? And if you apply these principles, you then start to design a product that's going to fix those problems. And again, this idea that you can't measure learning and development outcomes is about that often we haven't defined that problem that we're solving up front. Because once you do, it becomes quite clear how you keep tracking the result. But human-centered design really helps us make sure it's not about what we think is the solution. It's much more about what people need. And we also just select language. We use a lot of HR language, don't we? My partner also complains about that. You can all talk to Tim later. He can tell you all about the trials and tribulations of living with me. So the next one is T-shaped people and T-shaped teams. So I mentioned earlier that most big, juicy, complex problems to solve in the workplace require some type of learning and development expertise. But you're not going to be able to solve them by just working as a learning and development professional. And I think you're not going to be able to solve them just by working as a learning and development team. You're going to have to build a multi-skilled approach. Now, that might be that you build much more of a multi-skilled, therefore T-shaped approach within your team itself, or it's that you're going to start working across the people function much more to solve business challenges rather than learning challenges. And this is because anything from what I mentioned earlier, skills-based talent, you can't solve that just by being an L&D team. You have to work with the recruitment team, you have to work with talent, you probably have to work with business partners. You're definitely going to have to work with the business to understand what are skills, how to, scale teams up and down, how to build that kind of flexible approach. So for me, this is trying to move beyond the traditional kind of Ulrich model in many ways, which I think was particularly bad for L&D because we got made into these specialists that could never actually spend time with the business, which is just ridiculous. And I can see a few people nodding. It used to frustrate me beyond belief. And this idea, and it led to this concept of designing in our ivory towers. But I feel like we never wanted that outcome. It was much more that this Ulrich model kind of created it. So my big call out is that we now need to be T-shaped people and T-shaped teams. Now, some of you will be really familiar with this, and you probably heard me talk about it before, but I'll just explain it so we're all on the same page. So you've got the T. It's made up of the vertical, which is specialism. So people will have one or a couple of specialisms. Then you've got the horizontal, which is the broad generalist. And we often call these the jack of all trades. But we particularly used to put business partners, if you remember, in that kind of generalist area. So what I'm saying is that it's about being the full stack, the T-shape. And so each of you will have one or a few key specialisms that you bring, and it will be based on your whole career. For some of you, this might be marketing just as much as it might be learning and development or other parts of the people function. But then what's that general capability that makes you successful in your role? And this is what I think evolves more. So this is the one that I used in the book. And this one was trying to sort of represent more one that would come from more of an L&D background. So this person, expert in L&D and talent leadership and development. But think about that general capability. Okay, this person needs to be digitally savvy. They don't need to build the product, but they need to understand how digital works. They definitely need to understand a bit of people analytics. They've got to talk to that topic. They've got to ask good questions. They've got to read a report. Are they a data scientist? No. And I was, just the other day, I get asked to talk about this topic all the time. People love it because it's a kind of a framework that helps them think about skills-based talent. So I would add AI. This is what I'm trying to add to my T-shape at the moment. I'm never going to take AI into my specialisms. I'm just not that kind of person. But I need to have it in my general capabilities. And so general capabilities is that it's good enough. Yeah, I'm confident in that topic. I can contribute to a project and I use it in my everyday work, but I'm not the thought leader. I'm not the expert. And so the T-shape comes from the world of Agile, but it seems to really be landing really well with the people teams that I work with. And so this is an example of if you then thought about how do you put T-shapes together, you could have a really powerful team. And this kind of team could solve all kinds of business challenges. They would be able to solve skills-based talent approach for the organization. They'd be able to tackle climate emergency change, but also be able to do things like well-being or building leaders for the roles of the future. All these big complex problems that we love to take on in the people space. So that's where I'm trying to get people to shift to. So this could be your L&D team itself, or it could be your whole people function. It also, there's actually someone that I've worked quite closely with the T-shape in the room. This is a couple of models that are out there at the moment that some of you will be quite familiar with, and I do mention in the book. So you've got the new HR model from Gartner, and Gartner espousing that you need a strategic kind of area, you need your kind of operations and your people experience, and then you have a multi-skilled problem-solving pool, and they tackle prioritized business challenges. Then you've got Josh Burson. He's talking about systemic HR. And my joke that I always tell is that it sounds like a disease. But what he's saying is that rather than, again, a series of offerings and different sort of products and services, it's a whole system. And again, it's that whole product going out across the organization. And then the final one is one that is in the book that some of you might recognize, and that's the TomTom team that I've worked with for many years. And this is their new org chart. So this is how they're now structured. They have a people strategy and business partners section of the function. They have people essentials, just a couple of deep experts that oversee platforms, budgets, and sort of frameworks. They've got people services, which is your kind of front of house recruitment, as well as employee relations and operations. And then they have people products. And people products is kind of what L&D and OD used to be, but it's very multi-skilled. So they've got ex-tech people, ex-business partners in there, all kinds of skills. And what they do is they just take business challenge after business challenge, linked back to their OKRs and the priorities of the organization. And the whole thing about it is that they can move on topics. And the aim is to get a product going, get a product working, and then decide where it might then land once it's sort of more business as usual. The head of HR for this team said, I knew it was working when the board had a big issue and I needed to get an answer to them really quickly. I was able to ask one of these teams to just stop what they were working and jump on this and get something out the door within a week. He said, the old kind of Ulrich model, we would have taken a whole month just to pull people out from different teams to get that done. Or I would have given it to one person that I trust and, you know, they would have stayed up late night. So a really interesting model. So this is sort of what sits behind that T-shape. Number 4 is, of course, experimentation. Can't do Agile without experimentation. But it's not scary. It's actually a way of managing risk. And this is all about what's your hypothesis and how you're going to find some data to tell you whether that hypothesis is right or whether you're completely barking up the wrong tree. There's a few examples in the book which we can talk through. But what's really interesting is I think the term experimentation now is like some people still find it a bit scary, but I think in general business now see that you have to work more in this way because it's the only way to respond and adapt to the world around you. And actually, if you do it well, it's a very disciplined approach to risk management. So we can talk a bit about that. And then finally, it's deliver with impact. So if I take you back to what I said at the start, which is product-led, if you're defining the problem and building the solution to solve the problem, you can then start to track whether you're solving that problem. And so delivering with impact does become easier because you can, you know what metrics you're going after. And those metrics are going to be business metrics. They're not just who ticked the happy sheet and who attended. It's going to be, did we see movements into new jobs? Did we retain people after 2 years? Has there been an increase in sales outcomes? You know, are we seeing people having conversations in this way? What's the result? So you can start to track not just user behavior, but also, you know, financial outcomes. And for me, that's just so key. And in the book, I do a lot around how do you build a strategy in that way. So they're the 5 principles, and we thought we would explore them a bit more with you. And we were going to focus a bit more on human-centric design and T-shape, but you can ask whatever you want. Go for it. I did say I would give you an example, so let me just do that. I was working with an organisation yesterday in Scotland because I live in Scotland for the weather. As you can tell, you just get the most amazing tan in Scotland. And so I was working with a company up there, and they're sort of like a quasi-government agency. So it's this interesting space that they operate in. And they were attempting to solve skills-based talent. And they have worked on a project for a number of years, and someone has essentially built this huge database of skills information, and then they released this sort of what they call the learning ecosystem, and it was this lovely kind of design, and hey, here's all the skills, click on different skills and you can go and learn, and they created this sort of self-service kind of setup. And guess what? People weren't engaging with it in the way that they wanted. And so we went back and we redefined it. And just yesterday, we actually ran this little mini design thinking sprint, which ties quite nicely into human-centric design. But we went back and we went, well, what is the actual business challenge? What are we trying to achieve? And it was that we actually needed to identify and then essentially upskill or go and source the critical skills that this organization needed to deliver their corporate plan. So they've set this amazing corporate plan, and some of these skills were quite edgy. So it was like, okay, well, that's what we need to be doing. And then yesterday, so that's your sort of product led and defining that value. Yesterday, we had this one day where we put a T-shaped team together, and in the room we had all the skills across the organization that needed to solve this, be part of solving this problem. And what was so interesting is we started by testing a prototype, and the prototype reflected what had already been built, and it was this gorgeous design and all these skills. And halfway through that, someone goes, I hate it. I can't, this is terrible. This is not going to work. This is, and then when you went into the skills list, some of them were so detailed, versus the other ones that were really, so there was no kind of comparative value, all this stuff. And so we then did another round of prototyping. And what was so interesting, because we started to use that human-centric design approach, we started with the customer instead. And we started with, well, what do people need to do to solve problems for the customer? What skills do they need? But then what is the application of those skills? And so then we started to work back, and we essentially start to build this structure of how they could do this learning approach in the organization from that. So we were kind of experimenting real time. By the end of the day, I had them presenting to each other and running kind of mini tests. So that was like an experiment. But of course, the first round of the next kind of stage of the project will be their first experiment. But what's really interesting, if I think about deliver with impact, is that we now know what we're tracking. So one of the first areas we're going to focus on is an area of the business where it's sort of these critical roles that are going out to external stakeholders and customers, and we need them to have different conversations and get different outcomes. So we're going to measure that. So I just think it's a really interesting example of how you can apply those principles to probably a problem that a lot of you are facing at the moment. Yeah. Cool. Excellent. Fabulous. So let's hear from all of you. I think I put a slide to try and give us some instructions. But so great to see you all. So say hello to the people at your table. I think you were a bit earlier. And have a chat. Why are you here today? What's brought you here? And what topics and questions would you like to discuss or ask? There's some post-it notes on your table.
Quite right. Let me know. And if it's your post-it and it's not quite answering what you were asking, jump in. But over here, we've got a few all around, like how to support an L&D team to get started. So lots about like, where do we start? Obviously, the book is the best place to start. So how to get started, and then actually it sort of starts to come into how to start shifting from traditional to T-shape.
Okay.
So maybe how do you start in general, and then how to start building the team T-shape around that.
All right. Okay. So how to get started. So you treat it like an agile experiment, and you set your own hypothesis of the problems you want to solve. So you're applying all the principles we've just been talking about. So if you're an L&D team and you're thinking that bringing in agility is going to help you solve some problems because you either you need to work faster and get solutions out the door at pace, or you are faced with huge, just so many complex problems to solve all at once, and you need to get better at prioritizing where to spend your time and actually sort of demonstrate that value so you can start moving on to the next problem to solve, rather than kind of getting tied up in really big, long programs and initiatives. Another one is that you might be wanting to get maybe closer to the customer, or you're seeing the need to collaborate more effectively across maybe the people function or the organization. So there's going to be a few problems to solve yourself. Often digitalization is another one. So if you're needing to digitalize your L&D product, it's natural to bring in some agile ways of working with that. So set out your problems to solve and then set some hypothesis around it. So we're going to apply certain ways of working for a period of time, and we're going to measure how that goes. And so then it's okay that you don't all know how to do it perfectly to begin with, and it's a bit of a kind of learn together. But at the same time, you need to give yourself the space. So it's no use saying, we're going to work agile, but actually 80% of our work is still going to be delivered in a traditional kind of more waterfall way, or we're going to keep delivering 50% of our programs like this and 50% like in an agile way. So you need to kind of lean in and give your team the space, because otherwise they're sort of task switching too much, and there's competing kind of ways of working and targets going on. The other one is you can choose a certain juicy, complex problem and build a team around that, and that team runs with it in an agile way. But again, you've got to give them the capacity. So a lot of people are asked to join a project early in sort of agile transformation, and they're doing that while they're also doing their day job and other projects that aren't agile. And they're literally doing it off the side of the desk, and it fails quite often. So either you allow them to do that 100% of the time, which I know it sounds like a luxury, so often that doesn't happen, but you give them time to focus or hyper-focus. So I would say that this team always works on a Thursday on this project. That team, no one asks them to do anything else. And that team, they get work done on that day, but they also do some of maybe their activities or ceremonies, like, they're going to do some sprint planning, or maybe a review or a retro that happens on that day. But they also get work done. So they might just get work done individually, not always as that team. But that day is time boxed and precious and is kept for that work. And that means that on Thursdays, they're agile. And that at least is a good starting point. It's, again, still not ideal, but it's a good starting point. So that's what I would say is, what's the problems to solve? What's the hypothesis that you want to test and track? And then lean in. The other thing is, I think it's much easier to start with design thinking and start adding those tools, because using some design thinking and doing some prototyping and testing, there's just this natural connection with L&D, and people get really buzzy and energized by it. And actually by doing that, they often then see how they could then start to release and build the solution in a more incremental way. So it's a really nice sort of segue in. And there's a lot of, I personally can never separate design thinking and agile kind of project management. I feel like the two go hand in hand, because one helps you find out what are the problems to solve and build prototypes. The other one then helps you deliver it into the business in that kind of incremental. So that was a long way of saying how to get started. Yeah. What was the other question?
and then how to start the shift from moving into a T-shaped.
Okay. So camera keep stop. I think I move around too much with the camera. So Okay, so a couple of things. So the example I gave of that people function that had changed their structure, I worked with them for a number of years, and we actually started by introducing design thinking. So we all got together for a big kind of couple of day offsite, and we ran a big design thinking sprint, and we got people excited about Agile, and everyone went back and they were like, yeah, this is great. And so everyone's building personas and mapping experiences. And then the head of HR said, oh my God, Natal, we're just like, so now they're going crazy and they're just producing all this stuff, and the business is so overloaded. We now need to go to the next stage, but that was a good start. So the next stage was I started working with them to bring in an agile kind of cadence or cycle to the whole function. And what the whole point was we needed to understand the product, and we needed to understand all the work that sat underneath that. And we needed to get better at prioritizing, because the head of HR's sort of goal was, I need to know that the value we deliver is what matters the most to the organization. I need to be able to demonstrate that. So we brought in a portfolio of work, and we brought in an agile cycle. So we'd do some quarterly planning based on OKRs, that we'd visualize that kind of more at, if people know agile terms, more at that epic level, so that big chunks of work. And then everyone would get going for the month, and we'd have these online check-ins across the function. And then at the end of the month, we'd do some product reviews. And so different parts of the function would present what they'd been working on. And we were trying to get more unfinished products, but everyone wanted to show shiny new things to begin with. And then we'd have retrospectives. So we did that for a number of months, and we just found that we were too slow, and everyone had their own projects. So it was and that everyone had a level of importance to their own work. And it wasn't anything against that, but it was that there was no evidence that these different projects were linking back up to the most important thing. And if we were prioritizing on this, then we needed the whole function to follow that. So what was during that kind of shift, I introduced the T-shape, actually more as just a way to help people think about multi-skills and careers in a modern way. And people loved it. And what happened is people started to see the T-shape as a way to develop their career, but also see opportunities of working on new products and new projects, and actually it connected to this transformation we're doing. So they then made it one of the design principles of the whole transformation. So they had a few design principles, and one was that we work in it as T-shaped people and T-shaped teams. It was only after all of that, and then finding that by working in that new cadence and visualizing work and trying to prioritize in better ways, that the structure of the HR function was holding them back. And then they went to that new model. But what was so interesting is that the T-shape was the hook. So I actually think you can introduce the T-shape at any time. But then it's about, can you bring it to life? So this function, they used it as, so that in their teams, they were having conversations, sharing T-shape. They were then mapping their own T-shape as a team. And then when they moved into the new structure, they actually built each team based on a T-shape. And they were thinking, okay, what skills do we have? What do we need to source? What might we get from other parts of the business? So you've got to kind of incorporate it quite early into how you're working as a team. So I think there's one other example, the Diageo innovation team. So another person that's interviewed for the book. So she's the head of the HR innovation team at Diageo, and she uses the T-shape because it was a brand new team, and she started to hire based on kind of what she thought was mindset and cultural fit, and it wasn't really working. So she then started the T-shape, and she went, all right, so I need these, I'm looking for these skills, and she overlays a traffic light system with it. So she's tracking what skills that she has is green, what are they developing, what don't they have is red. And that, so every new person that comes into the team, she's thinking, okay, is this complementary skills or is this a new skill? If they are missing something, where do I get that in the business or external? So I think you can use it in that way as well.
One of the business transformations we went on last year is an example, and we happened upon moving into Agile and happened upon T-shape. So this time last year, we were, as a business, I had, the problem we had is Hive had become expert in designing very bespoke content for customers. So we got the fact that being customer-led, we were doing D&I, but you can't just do vanilla D&I learning initiatives, you can't do vanilla leadership initiatives. So what we then had is this high level of design into the programs, which as a product business was costing quite a lot. So we're having to hire tons and tons of designers, really spend a lot of time getting to know the business. So we had this problem where it was we can't scale this. This isn't a scalable solution. It's a bespoke consultancy in a way. And then what I've got is a tech team who over here are going, oh, we've got AI. What can AI do? And how can we put it into the product and help the product do better? So they started playing around with AI. And then we kind of went, oh, wait a minute, we're functional. So we've got product here, we've got engineering here, we've got customer success here, and we've got learning designers here, and we're kind of working in a functional way. Some bits tied up, it wasn't disastrous. But actually the problem that I had wasn't how do I move to an agile way of working. The problem was how do I scale the business? How do I implement AI? And how do I solve the customer problem better? And so actually what happened was we had the tech team were going, Laura, we've built a bit of tech which we think might make the learning designers redundant. And then I got learning designers going, we're working so hard, we can't make this, we can't build fast enough. So we basically took the tech and put it in front of the designers and went, what do you think? They were like, well, this is cool, but it's not as good as me. So let me play with it. And then basically we just automatically had this, we were just connected the dots. So the customer success team understand the customer and their problems. We've got the product who are understanding tech, but they can't solve the business problem because they're not connected. So as soon as I put the human designers next to the technology and the product, they started to work out how actually it could go a lot faster. So the learning designers went, tell you what, if you give me the product, I can play with it and make it me. You give it to me. So a product designer can't implement design thinking around learning design, but the learning designer can, and they can't code. So you put the two together and they start solving the problem. So getting that mixture of a team, then automatically the business just sort of over the next 3 to 6 months. One, I think someone asked about mindset on here. I have to say we were led by the LX team's mindset. They were curious and they were open. And so actually that led everybody else to go, well, wait a minute, if they're curious and open and they're not worried about losing their jobs, then maybe we can all lean in and do this. And so we sort of had this natural move where it made sense. And then we started picking up the book that came out so I could then use it to give more framework to what we were doing. And then so we sort of happened upon it. But you mentioned at the beginning, it's find the problems that are in the business, but find the problems that aren't maybe connected, and then where connecting problems together helps you move better or faster. And that was kind of where we started. And then the agile principles then help you to work out how to do it better. And then we've got T-shaped teams. It's quite interesting. I've got actually Izzy and Anna in the room who both hired in as specialists in marketing, and it just naturally happened where you were both doing about 1,000 different jobs going, but I'm meant to be this person. We were like, are you? Or actually, I hope you don't mind me sharing, you're a specialist here, but by the way, we're broadening out. And actually as a business, those roles are starting to become much more T-shaped, which hopefully is much more exciting, I think, for career development anyway, which helps motivate people. But they were two examples that we found happening in the business that sort of naturally moved around, but by focusing on solving problems.
Yes.
So we always talk about building a product that our customers love, but it's good for business. And then what are the problems that are helping us, what are the problems in the way, and how do we work multifunctional to get there? And then the kind of principles all make sense. Whereas sometimes you look at the principles and the way you're working, it's like, oh, how do you match this up? This is hard. So that's kind of how but it's an example. Everyone will come about it in different ways, but in case it's helpful to share examples.
Yeah, no, I really like it. And because when I interviewed her, I remember you talking about that also led to, was it that someone that was an engineer then became a product manager, you know, and so you had these sort of career journeys that started to happen.
Yeah.
And I think this is what we constantly talk about in organizations. Oh, it's no longer the ladder, you know, it's the squiggly career, but people find it hard to navigate that. Also, I think people find it hard to understand transferable skills. So that's what's been so interesting about the T-shaped model, is it actually opens up that conversation a lot more, because a lot of the transferable stuff is those general capabilities, and then these specialisms can be applied in different parts of the organization, different industries. Yeah, so because your specialism is something, you can't change that straight away, and you can't add a specialism within a couple of days, you know. Yeah, so but also what I try, people, and you know, I often talk about this sort of my own journey, and I used to talk about my skills kind of based on the jobs that I had done, and it was sort of more like a CV, you know. So I was a learning and development professional, that I did, you know, I did these things and I did these things, and if I wanted to get into a new job, I always thought it was more about the things, you know, that sat in that job description. Where now with my T-shape, I'm thinking, oh, okay, no, it's more about, am I setting, you know, I've got all these specialisms, some that come from before my time of L&D and HR, and some that now come from running my own business. But it's these general capabilities that's going to allow me to be more, to navigate and move around multiple scenarios. So I need to make sure that they're really healthy, and be quite strategic about what I'm developing on that level. Yeah, so.
Cool. What's the time? Does everyone want a 5-minute break? Should we do a quick break, toilet, quick refresh, and then come back and tackle more questions?
Sounds good.
So it is just before 1:15, but we'll make it a short one if that's all right. Come back around 20 past.
Definitely. Also, the people function, they usually have very set views on how a project should run and what the outcome is. Also, I know for years we've debated in the world of L&D, how do you deal with that manager that comes up to you and says, oh, we need, you know, time management skills, or we need, because no one's getting enough work done, or we need, you know, I need leadership development because some of my managers can't lead. And it's like, okay, and then if you can, you kind of dig into that problem and you ask some questions. And there was one, and you know, the solution can be really different. And there was this great example actually in the someone I interviewed for the book is Danny Seals. Some people might know Danny, and he gave a great example in the book launch that we did on LinkedIn Live. That apparently the exact same thing. These managers like, oh, we need time management. You know, this is terrible. And they went off to solve the problem, and they applied some design thinking. And apparently, it was as simple as people's cards weren't working effectively to get in the building. So people were literally late all the time because they were spending so much time getting into the building. And when they fixed that, that had nothing to do with learning. Actually, everyone was working really well together. So it just goes to show you. So the hippo thing's really interesting. So there's a couple of things in there. So I don't use Agile terminology if I think it's going to not land very well. I also don't really use human-centric design terminology. I use terminology such as, what is the business problem? What's our hypothesis? What data do we need to collect to understand what step to take next? That's why that concept of value is really important. And if you're okay, well, can we you know, run this, and if you think the word experiment is okay, then sure, you can use that. Or can we start here and work on this for 3 weeks, you know, 2 months, and get some data to understand if this is the hypothesis that we're dealing with, and actually that the next step is worth your money and your time. And usually, if you use that kind of language, they want to be part of it. And when you talk about the problem to solve, people often are quite happy to give your time and be part of the solution because they want to solve the problem with you. And I think that's what's really key. Another one is I've done ones where we have run design thinking sprints, say, for like a week, but we had the executive, we even had ones where we had the executive board, where the user testers that would come in at different stages of the design thinking sprint and give feedback on what we were developing. And at the And the end of it was the idea is that they basically sign off on what's coming out. And one of them was this really big, complex organizational change project that they'd been working on for months. And this was to try and accelerate the next step of it. And what was really interesting is that the executive came in at the end, and first of all, they're like, "Oh wow, this is different. You're working so differently." Then they were blown away by the amount of work that was completed in that time, and they got really into sort of essentially giving feedback around, "Oh, this will work, this wouldn't. Yeah, I'm happy to take that on. Let's start this first." So you're engaging them in the outcomes because they are literally your user testers. And it works quite well. The only caveat with that approach is that particular organization then thought Agile was running 1 week innovation sprints everywhere across the business. Yeah, so that's one thing. I do have an example, and I thought, so I might say something I prepared earlier. And it's in the book, but in different stages, so it's probably good to see it in this format. That helps you think about how to use certain tools and the approach. So some of you will be familiar with this. This is how I put design thinking, the double diamond, in with Agile. And it's not linear. And, you know, the Agile cycle goes across the whole project. But the reason I put it like this is that it separates out that when you start a project and you're looking at a business challenge, you actually don't know what to solve for yet. But at the business challenge stage, you talk about the value that you're going to deliver to the organization, the business bottom line, by solving this kind of big macro topic. And then by going through the design thinking steps, which is sort of the discovery stage, you come out with a list of prioritized problems to solve that are smaller and more manageable. And you also have certain prototypes that you can move into full project delivery. And if in the book, and I think we talked about this in the webinar, I actually do a project, what I call the product development life cycle. And there's different stages, and this sort of sits in different stages. But here's an example of how it can kind of look and feel. So the business challenge is high proportion of people leaving after 2 years. There's a really big organization, and this is what we engage the Hippo on. Okay, we've got some problems. We're losing people, particularly in certain parts of the business. How are we going to solve for this? Someone suggested at the time a career framework and some career ladders and a competency framework. So, and the team went, you know what? Why don't we just go and have a look at this in a new way? So they did some research, and people will recognise anyone that's not familiar with the double diamond, but I imagine a lot of you are, being the crowd that you are. But the double diamond is from the Design Council. It's sort of quite central to design thinking, and it's the idea is you diverge and converge. So you've got the challenge, you don't jump to the solution yet, you diverge, you explore everything that's going on, and then you converge on key problems to solve. But then you diverge again by ideating what are all the possible solutions and prototyping certain outcomes that you then converge on and take forward into delivery. So they looked at existing data, they built up a kind of map around where was the hot spots in the organization. They looked at some external research, but they also did these empathy interviews with people. What's career development to you? What's going on? And what was really interesting is the insights were that in this organization at the time, there was loads of job opportunities, but no one had any idea how to find them. And they couldn't connect to them. And it was easier to get another job at another organization, particularly after 2 years, which is when you want to start moving. What they also found is that anyone that was hired internally actually performed better and was more likely to stay in the job longer. And I think, hired were 70% faster in the job because they could hit the ground running. because they knew the organisation. So this is what you go back to the Hippo. Look, Hippo, we have some evidence to show that there is jobs, they exist, it's just that people can't find them. Can we solve for this rather than build the competency framework? So they had a list of problems to solve, and they're all really interesting problem statements. You know, how might we help people help others? How might we make supporting careers appealing to managers? So these were sub-problems, but they decided that how might we make career opportunities more visible in the organisation as the main one to tackle first. And this led to them ideating different possible solutions. One of them was, why don't we build a marketplace website connected to LinkedIn, which of course exists out there now, they were going to call it Rightmove to begin with, under the property website. And then another one was we could get people to be like graduates again, and they go around and try different jobs, but they realized that was pretty intense, so they focused on this one. And so then their prototyping and experiment was really interesting. So they mocked up the actual website on cardboard, and they set up this sort of lab conditions where people would come in. I think I've got the, I don't know. So they would come in and they would go, the employee would be sitting in front of someone, and they'd put up the first piece of cardboard, and it was, you know, a message has gone into their inbox. We're inviting you to join this in marketplace website. Oh yeah, okay, I click on that. Okay, this now appears on your screen, and it was the first landing page of the website. What would you do next? Oh yeah, it says to connect my LinkedIn profile. Oh no, I'm not sure about that. Oh, okay, why? Talk me through. And so they did that experiment with 25 people that were from these target groups. And it was only based on having enough evidence from that initial experiment that they then went to the next stage, which was to buy a group of licenses for a product that could do this, and then ran the next experiment, which was 3 months of running this product with 1,000 licenses. So I think it's a really interesting way of, you know, you can do experimentation really cheap and cheaply to then go back to the Hippo and say, we now have evidence that people will use this website. What was really interesting is when they went to the next stage, which was running the licenses, that there was part of the organisation that couldn't ever connect to this type of tech. So there was no use ever going to that part of the organisation. And the team was saying in the past, we just would have bought licenses for everyone, and it would have been wasted. So it's this kind of, how do you do it in these stages, and you're taking your Hippo along on that journey. Cool. Any questions on that? Comments, insights, jokes? Yeah, Tim's a joke like that. All right, cool.
And then maybe we've got time for just the sort of section here.
Oh, you're okay.
You're okay. Yeah. You're fine. As long as you're okay, it's like a deal. Away from the cords. That's fine. That's really helpful. I actually might think of this last year. My team will tell you this, is I've turned into the Hippo. So I'm used to being part of the team, having an idea, and people either told me to shut up or we kind of collaborated on it. And then I stepped into the CEO role this time last year and started saying things, and then people would start doing stuff on it. I'm like, no, I mean, it was just an idea. Like, no one challenged me. So actually, it was quite, I was having to like reverse thinking on it and say, should we investigate a little bit more around this idea? And do you think this is true? So I have to like reframe my thinking.
Just on that, with Hive, do you have a way where you kind of influence the client Hippo with human-centric design?
So we work really closely with, so we always refer to ourselves as a partner. And my favourite story is working with a bank in the UK. And when we first started working with them around 8 years ago now, we came in and said, look, I've got you coming in. And the reason I've got you coming in is we've written a set of hypotheses because the business and the Hippos have said, people don't do mobile learning here. And actually people don't do social learning here because we're too risk averse. So that tech doesn't work for us. and we were a social mobile, we were a peer-to-peer learning mobile first platform 8 years ago. And he was like, so what I've done is I've done a set of customer interviews, and I've worked out that some people do want this, but does it work? Does it not work? Are we going to be too risk averse? So he'd written a set of hypotheses, which we then went about disproving. So the hypotheses were people don't do mobile learning in the bank, and people don't feel comfortable to share on a learning platform. So then we set about, and what we didn't do is like, okay, well, let's prove it on this audience. We set 3 programs already live, and worked out how we wrapped around them, and then tested the different scenarios. And we, even within that, we had a subset of hypotheses, which were, you know, how do people feel comfortable sharing? What are the 5 things that we do in design and delivery that make people feel comfortable sharing? So how do we do blended face-to-face onboarding to kind of, and we tested. So they were brilliant at allowing us to have 3 cohorts, and 1 cohort where we did a face-to-face facilitation and built up the confidence and looked at the impact of sharing on the back of that. So everything was data-led. So I'd say the customer really led it. So Hive works particularly well when we've got the right environment for us to come in and work in that way. But we also do have frameworks which we've then adopted in terms of let's do a 3 months kind of proof of concept with you, or maybe not proof of concept, or what's the word? I'm not allowed to use pilot.
Yes.
And basically, what's the data you want to get to? What's the things that are important? What problem are you trying to solve? And then how do we go about doing this in a step-by-step way to work out, you know, we want to get from here to here, and let's use the data to work out whether we're going to go in a straight line or slightly wiggly to get there, and work out what's right for your audience. So that's how we tend to work. But they really led the way in hypothesis writing. That was really exciting to kind of go through that process.
And I like the one of disproving but also I think the big danger a lot of teams I work with is they set a hypothesis and then God damn it, they're going to prove that right. And we get a lot of confirmation bias comes in. So remember, a hypothesis is just a hypothesis, and you collect data. And actually, even on that career development one, they were some of the ones what they looked at when they ran that 3-month experiment with the licenses is who clicked and on a recommended role that due to them, because the whole basis was that you connected your LinkedIn profile and then you get these recommended roles from the organization and you could apply for them internally. And so they wanted to see how many people did that and how many successful hires resulted. But I was talking to the leader recently, and they were most interested in the people that didn't engage at all, because what's going on there and why, or the ones that applied and they didn't get the job. So actually, some of the what's the negative data is really interesting to investigate. So
we still, I mean, we're 8 years in, we still work with that client, and actually still work in a way where the business quite often, like parts of the business, is like, can we use Hive for this? And actually, we have a set of rules which we've learned over the 8 years, which is actually in this scenario with this group of people, and this, it's actually probably not right, because we've tried it a couple of times, and actually, you probably need this type of solution. So we've been able to scale, but in a way that works for the business and works for the employees. Which I think it's as much like you said about not proving or confirmation bias, but just working out where it's the right solution that makes your end users happy. And so that kind of set of rules around where we go, and rules sound quite firm, but
I think it's setting up the parameters. There's another example in the book with a company that's UK based, much smaller, called Tombola. Some of you might have heard of them. They're like a big bingo online bingo company. They're based in Sunderland. They Amanda Bellwood is their head of HR, and she's someone I've worked with lots over the years. They went to solve flexible learning and flexible working. So, and because their pulse surveys kept coming back with people wanted more choice. And at the time, they had sort of set the policy that people only have to be in the office 3 days a week, and you can choose what days they are. And then you have to be working at certain hours, and I'm sure lots of you are in the same scenario. And people still wanted flexibility, so they're like, so they went and did this big design thinking approach, and they thought, yep, we're going to nail this, not a problem. And they went through it, they did focus groups, all this stuff. And hey, guess what? Everyone sees flexibility differently. There was no one answer. It was really kind of complex and murky. And so what they then turned it into was an ongoing kind of experimentation. So what they do is they go to local level teams, so either functional teams, and they also have other locations outside the UK. So one of the first areas they went to was Spain, and the Spanish office, it was much smaller, people had a long commute. So what was happening is that people would choose what days they would come in, and sometimes there was hardly anyone else in the office, and it was really demotivating. And then they often were on Teams calls with the UK all the time, so they weren't really engaging in the office. So as an office, they decided to set a hypothesis of, we'll take away the choice and we'll determine what days we're all in, and on these days we're going to work in this way. And so they ran that for 3 months, and it was very successful. So then they changed the policy for Spain. And what the team now do is they set up the kit. So this is how you go and run the experiment. So what's your hypothesis? What's the measurements that you're going to track? So the people team essentially, set the rules, I suppose, and then track the experiment. And then there has to be agreements that productivity is the same, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, now we'll change the policy. So I thought that's a really interesting one of how to do it. Yeah.
I like setting up the framework.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Decentralized teams or globally dispersed.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's go for one more here. So
Okay.
one actually, I think you just mentioned actually around experimentation. How do you really get teams to do it? The other ones here are about impact. So how can you really make an impact on business or deliver impact? And how do you measure the benefit that's been added?
Mm-hmm.
So you around there.
Yes. So I would just say, so probably the main message I'd like to share around measurement and impact is what I call lead and lag indicators. So when we go off to solve, like we saw in that career development example, we've got a high proportion of people leaving after 2 years. That's not going to change immediately. And if the solution is we're going to get people to apply for internal jobs and get them to stay because they're going to move around the organization, all of that takes some time. And I think in a lot of things that we work on, there's a big lag for a lot of the metrics that we're saying we're going to impact. And of course, we often say we're going to impact the engagement survey, which is something that, there is a big lag with that. So it's about having lead and lag indicators. So your lead indicators is going to be much more like what was in that example. At each stage, you've got measurements either of intent to use or you've got direct user behavior. So the more digital your solution, the more you can track user behavior. So how many people are opening up emails? How many people are accessing the information? What are people doing? Are they watching the video? So some of that is a bit more of activity based, but you're seeing the engagement with the product immediately. And if you're not getting any, quite quickly, you'd be wanting to step in. And then you can start tracking those lag indicators around, over time linked to the user behavior. So I think it's just good to think of both of those, because we often go and tell the executives that we're going to influence the big measurements, and you've got to set their expectations. Okay, so we think we need about 6 months to really shift the dial here, or maybe even a year. So we're going to report on the user behavior leading up to that to understand that we're on track. So that's often how I would do it. The other one is in the book. When you start with that business challenge, I ask you to think about value from 3 perspectives. One is business bottom line. So if we solve this for the business, what's the impact on the bottom line? One is the end customer. So the people that buy the products and services that your organization produces. So whether that's community or whether that's you actually sell a product. And then the third one is employees. So have metrics from each of those that you're tracking, and of course lead and lag in both of those. And then usually that can work quite nicely. how about you? When you go into organizations, how do you measure impact?
So there's usually two things that happen when we go in. The first is we say, what's the measurement? What's the impact you're looking for? What's the business value? And have a really clear answer. The other is, don't know, or it's we want to see, we basically just want to see everyone complete learning. That's what we're looking for. So completion rates in learning is obviously a really common metric we're looking at, which would be a leading indicator, I suppose. Yeah. But leading to what?
Exactly.
And why is it that completion rates are important? And so what we're trying to understand in how you roll out Hive is more of both the metrics of like the user experience. So how is this audience engaging in this learning experience? What's right for them? Are they accessing it via mobile, via laptop? What time of day are they tend to be learning? How often are they? What's micro learning to this group of people? Those things are interesting because they allow us to evolve it to become more and more relevant, more and more specific, to helping kind of create the right experience. And then it's like, but what's the business impact? So if everybody completes, what then? And that's the question that I think sometimes we find it hard to work with our customers to work out what that answer is. Yeah. And it's because the steps before haven't been thought through. Yes. And so we spend some time trying to work those types of things out. So we've got some great examples where it's like retail and you're upskilling people in a retail environment around sales and product knowledge. And, if everyone completes, the assumption is that leading indicator leads to sales and the tills. Where you've got something more like leadership, leveling up your leadership and completion rates on a leadership program leads to, and so it's trying to work out what those next things are and what the impact, why we started the initiative in the first place. So we get spaces where it's really easy and places where it's hard and it's more iterative. And
I like that because I think I saw nods with the rate of completion is a really big one that we go after. But the danger is that we make that becomes the whole program. So, and we all kind of motivated around getting completion rates, and we've lost the why around that. And then, as we all know, if you then make something mandatory, people hate it, even if they refuse to enjoy it, even if they kind of do. So it's I think we can set ourselves up to fail sometimes, I suppose, by making that the measurement rather than, hey, this is an indicator that people are engaging with it and we're going to get the outcomes that we're after. I think that's but also I just think it's and this is why I talk about working product led, because particularly in L&D, you are product managers now, and a lot of your product is digitally enabled. You can track so much stuff, so much activity. So it's like, being the CEO of Hive, you've got all these tools that you can be checking, and I think the more that you lean into that, the more you can be tracking on a quite week by week, month by month basis of how are things working, and you can keep iterating and kind of all right, well, that's not working, so let's now do this to it, or as you were saying, trying different things to see if you get different engagement, or going, oh, hang on, maybe the fundamental thing that design's not working here, let's go back. So I feel like you can be these product managers now, which is a new way of seeing our profession. It's very different. Someone here used to work at Macmillan, and the head of L&D at Macmillan is also got interviewed for the book, and he made a really interesting point. He said, before we worked more agile, we used to see a business challenge through our learning lens, and so if I gave it to the e-learning specialist, I got an e-learning solution. If I gave it to the management development specialist, I got a management development solution. And what we had to do was lift up and talk about the business problem, and let go of our specialisms in many ways, and goes, because most business challenges, there's a bit of e-learning, there's a bit of management development, but there's also some other aspects. So I think that's and then if you do that, I think the measurement comes from designing in that way.
Also, working in partnership informs our product direction too. So there's things where one of the problems we've looked at is that problem of completion rates, going, well, actually what the customers are saying is, I want to level up my leadership, or I want to make sure that it's speed to skill acquisition across these core skills in leadership. You know, these are the skills that we've identified are right for the leadership team. But actually, the problem is, it's not that they all need to complete it all; it's that they're all starting from different places.
Yeah.
And therefore, they're not completing it all because not all of it's relevant, right? There's no point in me doing this course if I already feel really competent in it and doing it. So then we're thinking, okay, well then we actually need to think back into design and how we deliver this. If actually you're wanting everybody to level up in leadership, you're not looking for completion rate, you're looking for making sure we understand where they start and that by the end of it you've all leveled up to the same, that everybody's got a good level of acquisition of those skills. So it's just, I felt like I probably finished that halfway through, so I thought it was quite helpful just to go back and think about how it feeds back into design thinking of how you roll something out. And close that loop.
Another reference, is it Guy Wallace? And I'm trying to think of a few. They're in the book. They're in the Deliver with Impact section. But there's a group of people that are been in L&D for a long time, and they talk about that it's not about learning; it's about performance. And and that actually there's a danger if we talk about competencies and kind of knowledge and behaviors, because we're not talking about, again, the outcome. So this is thinking more about, rather than activity, it's the outcomes rather than output, you know, it's the impact. And so their example is, well, it's no use going on communication skills training. What does that really mean? And how would you measure the outcome? You have to measure that this person can answer a series of questions in a tough negotiation, or they can present in a certain way. So it's what are you wanting to see happen in the business, that's what you're measuring. And so then the learning happens here, but then you're measuring the outcome. And I think that's a nice way to view it as well. Yeah. Cool. So where are we at with time?
It is 5 to 5.
Oh, God, right. Let's let it go.
So we have got some refreshments and stuff if you like. We went very quickly. Hopefully we've gone through actually quite a few of the questions on here, but we will follow up as well. I think we have Alexander's coming up.
Oh no, I've just got them on the screen.
Oh, okay. The winner.
Yeah.
So we have a book competition for 2 books.
2 books, and then I'm going to put something up on the screen as well.
Cool. Would you like to?
Yeah, for sure. And I have to sign them for you. And then we've got a couple of books that if anyone wants to get one, you can get one from us at an author's price. And who was Sherry. Congratulations, come on down. Good. It's actually, I'll sign it. So good. Yeah, I'll bring it back. And then is it Janie Burdett?
Thank you.
Cool.
I hope you'll all join me in saying a huge thank you to Natal for coming and sharing all the insights from her book and stories and experiences. So thank you very much, Natal.
Thank you.
And it's been great to see everyone sharing and talking and diving into lots of different conversation skills. So thank you for that. And thank you all for coming here to Scale Space to see us. Hopefully it's been a great afternoon. We've got some refreshments and food, so please stick around if you've got time. Carry on networking, speaking to us. But yes, thank you so much for coming. Please stick around. Check out Hive Learning if you like to. We love to chat to people. If you want to do some user-centric design as an LX designer, we have what we're calling it's got a really terrible name, I'm sorry, a beta curator cohort, which means that basically we've designed a tool, so it's a prototype that we're evolving quickly, and for us to really understand how to use it so that it delivers and solves the problem for you to design relevant programs. We're putting it in the hands of a team of LX designers, and we're asking you to give us feedback on what it does, how can you make it better. So if you've